Hello. It's like a lot of okay. Whenever I do these videos, it's like Anyway, welcome to a brand new show of Hot Topics. My name is Gabrielle Crichlow, and I am your host. If you're watching this on video, there's a little headline here. I'm the owner and director of A Step Ahead Tutoring Services. Welcome to Hot Topics. Welcome to a brand new episode. If you are new to the show, if you have no idea what this show is about, first of all, welcome. Second of all, let me tell you. So, this is the podcast where we like to have real talk about real things. Since we are part of A Step Ahead Tutoring Services, this is, I guess you could consider it educational programming in a way. We like to take a variety of topics and explore it using an educational lens and informational lens. We want to teach you things, whether it's homeschooling, disabilities, whether it's, someone's life struggles. We want to use it as a teaching tool to get the message out and for you to learn something. So this is a learning show. And speaking of learning, I am totally looking forward to this show because as someone who's majored in clinical mental health counseling for graduate school, I love an opportunity to talk about mental illness, and I have the platform, so why not? So I don't know if it's geeking out necessarily, but I get to practice my mental health counseling in a way because today the topic is, what is schizophrenia, right? What is schizophrenia? What is it? What does it look like? What are the myths and misconceptions? So this is the show that we're going to talk about it. We're going to dive deep into it, and I'm totally looking forward to this conversation. And the best part is, well, one of the best parts is I have a returning guest. It is my returning guest. Sorry, my words are like, blah, blah, blah. My returning guest is Sarah Gallup. I'm so excited that she is coming back to the hot seat. And let me just remind you about who she is. So, Sarah Gallup is a licensed psychologist at a forensic state hospital, and she's the host of the new podcast, Behind the Walls of the World's Psychiatric Hospital. So, we're going to shout out her podcast later on in the show, but she has come back to the hot seat. So, we're just going to go ahead and start. Hi, Sarah, how are you doing?
Hi, Gabrielle. I'm good. Thank you. How are you?
Good. Welcome back to the hot seat. Welcome back to Hot Topics. I'm glad I didn't scare you away.
Thanks for having me back.
So, like I said, I majored in clinical mental health counseling in graduate school. So, whenever we get to talk about, or whenever I get to talk about mental illness, I'm all for it, right? Because it's pretty much my entire graduate career,
Very
right?
cool.
Is mental
Mine too.
illness. So yeah. So where I don't know, is it geeking out? Is that
Oh,
the
totally.
yeah, we're
I
gonna
love
geek
geeking out
out.
about this stuff.
We're gonna geek out about mental illness, specifically about schizophrenia. So I definitely want to have that conversation. So let's dive right into it. So let's start with the most basic question. What is it? What is schizophrenia?
Well, it's sort of a complex disorder. There's really a lot to say about it. If we look at just the word itself, schizophrenia, schizo comes from the Greek, which means split or fragmented. Phrene also comes from the Greek, which means mind. And so we have this split or fragmented mind. And so there's really, that sort of also leads into some of the misconceptions that I'll probably talk about later, that a lot of people mix up schizophrenia and what we used to call multiple personality disorder, what we now call dissociative identity disorder. what schizophrenia is largely, it's like I mentioned, it's a very complex disorder. It's made up of what we call positive and negative symptoms. And those terms sort of seem a little misleading. So, positive, not in the sense of good or like a trait that you necessarily want to have, but it's something positive as an added that somebody who doesn't have schizophrenia wouldn't have. So, for instance, I don't have schizophrenia. And so, something that would be added that I don't have would be the presence of auditory hallucinations or visual hallucinations or delusions, paranoia, false beliefs are delusions. Um, and maybe some odd behaviors. We also have negative symptoms, and those are things that should be in every person, but are not in people with schizophrenia. So it's something that's taken away essentially. And so those symptoms often are most prominent in schizophrenia. So those are symptoms like apathy, avolition. They don't want to do anything. It's hard to get them up and out of bed, motivated for the day. Uh, they often have what we call a flat affect, which means no expression on their face. So most people just naturally, without even thinking about it, express some sort of emotion with their face. And many folks with schizophrenia who are experiencing negative symptoms will show no expression. You don't know if they're happy, if they're sad, if they're bored, if they're whatever. And that's a very, very common symptom that a lot of folks have. And so, often with schizophrenia, you'll notice that it kind of manifests in different ways. We now think of schizophrenia as being on a spectrum. We think of a lot of things as being on a spectrum these days. And so there are very mild forms of schizophrenia where people have symptoms that don't necessarily interfere with a lot of aspects of their life. They're able to live in the community, they're able to hold a job, they're able to have families and live like anybody else would. And then the folks on the other end of the spectrum, which are generally the people that I end up working with, are the people who their schizophrenia and their symptoms have really impacted their life in a devastating way. And so they might it may have interfered with their work, it may have interfered with their family and their relationships, and most notably, because of where I work, it's interfered with their ability to follow the law. And so most of my patients have legal problems, and some of them have a legal history that follows them wherever they go. And so the schizophrenia and the symptoms often contribute to that. So there's really a lot that goes into schizophrenia. So in a nutshell, that's basically what schizophrenia is, although there are certainly more layers that I can get into in a little bit.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. When you're talking about, when I hear you talk about positive and negative, it just all just came rushing back. Just schooling and yeah, so it's interesting when you say like positive and negative symptoms. It's
Mhm.
not like positive in the sense of like good.
Right,
It's positive in the sense of it's there, right?
right. It's there
And
and
then
it shouldn't be.
right, and then negative in the sense of it's not there,
Correct.
right?
It's not there and it should be there.
Right, right. So let's break it down.
Hmm.
There's um two types of symptoms for people with schizophrenia,
Hmm.
right? There's can you could you go into that?
Like the positive and negative symptoms.
Right, hallucinations and delusion.
Yeah, absolutely. So positive symptoms, really, it takes a variation. Some people experience some more than others. And so there are all sorts of different types of hallucinations. People can have the most common that many people have are auditory hallucinations. And if we were to just look at auditory hallucinations, sometimes they sound like whispers. It's extra noise in the background. So it really varies from person to person how they experience these auditory hallucinations. I often ask people, well, do you hear the voices inside your head or outside of your head? And that makes a big difference. You know, some of them, they're more an internal kind of inner dialogue almost that are separate from their thoughts. Cause I ask my patients a lot, well, how can you tell the difference between the voices and your own thoughts? And they say, oh, it's really different. I can tell when I'm thinking something and then when something else is intrusive and coming in. Other times it's as real to them as somebody speaking to them across the room. So it's an external outside of their mind voice. And there have been studies in the past about where they've taken MRIs and they've actually looked at the brain and the brain activity while people are experiencing auditory hallucinations, and the parts of the brain that actually pick up auditory information. So what I would naturally, the parts of my brain that would naturally light up if I hear a bell ring or a phone ring, are also lit up when these people are experiencing auditory hallucinations and there's nothing actually happening in the room. So I find that to be really, really fascinating. So, uh, when we're talking about auditory hallucinations, sometimes there's also what we call command auditory hallucinations. And these are hallucinations that are instructing or commanding the person to do something. These are, unfortunately, among my guys, very, very common. And um, they might say things like, commanding the person to harm themselves or kill themselves. They might also be telling somebody to harm somebody else or kill somebody else, or to do something like stick something into a light socket, again, in order to hurt themselves or maybe to cause a fire or something. So sometimes they can be very dangerous. And that's often what gets people in legal trouble. So auditory hallucinations are really the most common. The other types of hallucinations are far more rare. So they're, if somebody mentions that they have visual hallucinations, so they're seeing things that aren't necessarily there, that's somebody who's going to be on the more severe end of the spectrum. It can also be a way to weed out potential malingerers because it's not very common that people have visual hallucinations. I think that's one of the myths that's sort of perpetuated by popular culture and movies and such. Um, Visual hallucinations can be quite bothersome and can actually trigger a lot of aggression or other emotions. So if they're starting to see something, just with the patients that I'm working with right now, for whatever reason, they have a lot of visual hallucinations. I shouldn't say a lot. I'm thinking of two patients in particular that have visual hallucinations of animals. And when the animals show up, that's generally a bad sign. Other hallucinations that folks can have, they can have tactile or feeling related hallucinations. So we have patients who feel like they have bugs or spiders crawling all over them. I think that would be awful. Olfactory hallucinations where they're smelling things that aren't necessarily there, and other sensory hallucinations. Sometimes they it's very, very rare that people will like taste something that's not there, but sometimes it does happen. Usually, if there's an olfactory hallucination where they're smelling something, especially if it's burning, that's something, you know, it smells like something's burning in the other room. We have to really, really be careful of that because that could have an organic cause, like a brain issue. And so that's something that we need to have checked out medically. Um, let's see, other positive symptoms, a common one is paranoia, the belief that people are following them, after them, going to get them, stealing from them. It's very, very common. Unfortunately, it's very common around among our folks who have been unhoused. And that sort of makes sense because their world is wrapped up in maybe a shopping cart or just the space around them. And so they have to heavily guard the things that they are holding on to. And so it's sort of makes sense that people might be watching them, or they're worried that people might be stealing from them, or what have you. And that persists even when they get to the hospital. It's very common, I've noticed over the years, that Many of these patients have struggles with law enforcement or similar authority figures. So there are many delusions about the police in general, about the FBI, about the CIA. And so I've had patients who believe the FBI is after them, that they're part of a CIA mission. And so it's really common to have delusions surrounding that. It's also very common to believe that, uh, they are affiliated with a celebrity of some sort. One of the particular delusions we have to watch out for is called erotomania, and that's the false belief that not necessarily just a celebrity, but celebrity or somebody of a higher status is in love with that person, and that they might be in a relationship with that person. And so we have patients who have contacted celebrities, who have reached out to celebrities, who believe they are married to celebrities, who have committed crimes in the name of celebrities, or they've said that their command hallucinations are the voice of this singer or that actor, and that they have to do it because that person is telling them to do so. So that can be certainly problematic as well. Um, other really common symptoms are disorganized behavior, disorganized speech. So this is one that we see a lot because of the cognitive impairments of schizophrenia. So how do I want to say, disorganized behavior is generally what comes across in police reportments, like this person was acting weird. And often witness statements will say this person was acting oddly, they were acting strangely, something wasn't right. And that's generally what we classify as disorganized behavior. So this might be spinning around in circles, or they had odd movements with their hands or their legs, or they were zigzagging across a parking lot in a strange manner, or something was just kind of off. Disorganized speech, similarly, is speech that when you're talking to the person, you really can't follow what they're saying. They're speaking, they're putting together sentences. It seems like it should make sense, but for whatever reason, it doesn't. And so disorganized speech is very, very common, mostly because schizophrenia is a brain disease, and it causes essentially the deterioration of the brain. And so, one of the issues that people have as their schizophrenia is left untreated and it advances is that it really starts to deplete some of their brain, and their ability to use language, their ability to sustain focus and concentration, um, and it impairs their memory as well. So we have quite a few people whose memory is so bad that these things that were once delusions are now actually ingrained as actual fact. And so they truly, truly believe that these delusions they've had over the years are 100% true, and it is impossible to convince them otherwise. And so that can be very, very dangerous. If you go to somebody and you say, no, this thing that you said happened actually didn't, there's no evidence that it happened. Um, as you might imagine, that can really upset people and make them quite aggressive. Or they can just shut down entirely. So it looks different for different people. So that's a little bit about positive symptoms. The negative symptoms, and I see these so often in my patients at the hospital. These are patients who they spend most of their day or all day in their bed. They sleep, they don't want to attend groups, they don't want to attend treatment team meetings. They'll get up for their meds, they'll get up for their meals, because you can't miss breakfast, lunch, dinner. But they won't do much of anything else. And often they won't engage with their peers, they won't engage with staff. They can be among the most difficult to work with because there's just not a lot there. Unfortunately, they don't show a lot of emotions, so we don't know if they're struggling, if they're having an okay day, if they're looking forward to something. It's just we've got nothing to go off of. And so these are folks that are incredibly difficult to treat, and they can be sometimes some of the most difficult patients because there's just nothing there. They're not talking to us, so we don't know what's happening inside. And they're not, coming out of their rooms very often. So it, that makes it really difficult, really, really difficult. There's some of, like I said, among some of the most difficult patients that I work with. So that just briefly, that's a little bit about the symptoms of schizophrenia.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. You definitely gave a mouthful there. And, I'm glad that you mentioned the portrayal of schizophrenia in movies
Mhm.
because,
Mhm.
particularly in movies and television shows, it seems to be a negative portrayal of that.
Mhm.
And I want to get into that, but there's something else I want to get into a little bit
Sure.
before. So, when does when do symptoms typically show up? Because, I have one client that I work with. Um, I think he had his first psychotic break. I want to say maybe in like his 20s, and it just like came out of the blue,
Mhm.
and it just kind of happened, um and he has his immigration issues.
Mm.
So there's a whole like
Yep.
department that kind of deals with undocumented patients with mental illness, but
Mhm.
particularly with this client, I want to say in his mid 20s. He
Mhm.
was kind of going about his day, and then all of a sudden he just had a break, you know, and then that kind of led to like the dissolution of his marriage, and he had to
Mm.
kind of moved to a different country and
Yeah.
things, and then he lost his job, and it just kind of unraveled from there, which tends to
Mhm.
be pretty common for or people with early schizophrenia. Things just
Mhm.
kind of unravel. um so can you talk more about the onset of schizophrenia, like how old do what's the age you tend to
Mhm.
get it, and when does it all start?
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. So it's a little bit earlier for men than for women. And for men, it particularly starts around 17, 18, so late high school age, and then generally goes to about 25. And so for most men, once they reach 25, if they don't have signs, they're generally pretty good, and probably won't get it. Although there are always exceptions for everything. For women, it's generally a couple of years later. So 1920 could be the onset time, and then goes till about 27 or so for the onset. And it's really difficult because at that time, high school age, early adulthood, there's a lot of natural stressors. So usually what we look at is it can be hard to detect unless they have like a really obvious break, like you were referring to. But often they have what are called prodromal syndromes, and those are the first, the initial symptoms that really start to show up. Sometimes it's something as simple as a little bit of paranoia that's a little more out of the blue, or they're more anxious, or they're unable to sustain focus. So it can look like a lot of different things. Um, Often those prodromal symptoms of schizophrenia are misdiagnosed for depression or anxiety or ADHD because that's what they look like. And so it's really difficult to correctly diagnose an early stage of schizophrenia, just because, like I said, it looks like so many other things. Um, Often, what I've noticed with many of my patients is that I've noticed patterns over the years. One is that most of my patients, but certainly not all, come from a pretty traumatic background. And trauma, of course, looks different in different forms. It could actually mean physical, emotional, or sexual abuse. It could mean growing up with what I'm sure you've talked about on your podcast before, the ACEs study, the adverse childhood experiences. And so it could be family dissolution, problems with, divorce, siblings being moved around. Maybe they're moved around to foster homes, or to other placements. That can be really challenging for a lot of people. I think most of us would struggle with that. Um, and often there will be early substance abuse. And so many of my patients have talked about their drug and alcohol use started somewhere between 10 and 13. So we get this sort of chicken and the egg sort of phenomenon with the onset of schizophrenia, where many of the symptoms of schizophrenia look a lot like the effects of drug use. So, for instance, if somebody is using methamphetamine, they might start seeing things, they might start hearing things, they might start feeling paranoid, and that's going to overlap a lot with the symptoms of schizophrenia. And I used to work in a couple different emergency departments doing behavioral health consultations, and it was nearly impossible to decipher, okay, well, how much of this is the meth use, how much of this is their natural schizophrenia that they've already been diagnosed with. And so it's really difficult to tell with that onset, what came first, right? Was it the early substance use that maybe altered their brain chemistry in some way, or the structure of their brain, or is it the natural organic schizophrenia? And sometimes we never have the answer to that. So it's very difficult and it's hard. I have seen, like you were describing, Gabrielle, those um the actual splits, where somebody has experiences a psychotic break. It's very scary. I remember working several years ago with a family, and they just seemed like a really lovely family, and the son was experiencing psychosis for the first time, and the family didn't know what to do. It was very scary for them. All of a sudden, he hadn't been using substances, so we knew this was an organic presentation. And all of a sudden, they just didn't recognize their son. And the sort of good thing was that sometimes with psychotic breaks, sometimes it's just a one incident thing. And other times it's a sign of the diagnosis becoming more progressive, right? So there are cases of people who have one psychotic episode and that's it. We call that brief psychotic disorder. And then sometimes it evolves into full-blown schizophrenia and becomes a chronic, lifetime illness. Many of my patients, unfortunately, will say it's a very common myth among my patients that, oh, well, I'm taking medications now so that I don't have schizophrenia anymore. I'm not experiencing symptoms, so it must have gone away. And so many of them will discontinue their medications thinking, oh, well, I'm cured now. And then a little down the way, their symptoms start to return, or they return in full force. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, my schizophrenia is back. And it's like, well, you had it the whole time. It just was very well controlled with medications. So we have to encourage our patients, strongly encourage our patients to continue taking their medications when they leave, even if they're feeling well, because they're feeling well because of their medications. And that's a logic that's really difficult for many of them to understand. So yeah, so that's a little bit about schizophrenia. There's also a similar disorder within the category of schizophrenia spectrum disorders called delusional disorder. Delusional disorder is basically schizophrenia. It's just the delusion part. So they don't necessarily have auditory hallucinations. They don't necessarily have negative symptoms and all of that. They just have the delusions. And that has a later onset. There's sort of an extra burst around age 40 for men and women, where they could possibly have a later onset of delusional disorder without the other accompanying symptoms of schizophrenia. It can be just as problematic and it can cause just as many legal disorders. But it's very strange to talk to somebody with delusional disorder because they seem like everybody else until you touch on that one subject that they're very delusional about. And so that one, as somebody under 40 and closely or quickly um, getting closer to 40, I should say, I'm like, oh, I'm still not out of the woods yet. So once we cross that hill, I'll be a little bit, I'll be feeling a little bit better about myself. But it's certainly a scary thought to think that, if you make it past the mid 20s, the teenager and mid-20s hump that maybe there could be a smaller chance that delusional disorder could set in later.
Yeah, yeah. And it's funny that you mention delusional disorder because um I think I think I'm trying to remember like what I learned about it in terms of whenever you're addressing somebody who's having delusions, it's you don't want to challenge the
Mhm.
delusion. You don't want to
Right.
say no, that's not true,
Right.
right? Because that's what makes them belligerent. That's what makes
Mhm.
them aggressive. But you want to say more of you kind of want to, how do I phrase it? I guess use it in a way that gets to the core of the problem. So
Yeah.
something like, oh, I'm seeing, I don't know, I'm trying to, I'm just throwing it out there. Oh, well, a common delusion tends to be like religious. So,
Mhm.
you know, I have my angel and he
Mhm.
talks to me and you know, and he guides me every day or,
Mhm.
or my angel told me to walk into traffic or something like that. And
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
like, um, so instead of saying, no, that's not true, because that's what makes them aggressive, you want to say something like, well, you know, why would your angel tell you to do that? Or
Mhm.
can you talk to your angel? Like, can you
Mhm.
negotiate? Like, you want to say more of like, you want to kind of, I guess, I don't know how to say it, like to pretend that it's there.
Yeah, I would agree. And
Like, can
I
you talk more about that?
the word that I would use is like validate
Yeah.
their beliefs in some way, because for instance, like I have a patient who's going through a delusional phase right now, and just told me the other day that he is both God and Jesus and creator of everything. And um even though we know it's not true, to him it is true. And so saying, wow, that sounds like it would be a lot of responsibility for you. That sounds like it would be really hard. Like, how do you manage that? And that I if that were me, I would feel like that was too much responsibility. And so sometimes that can be an effective way of saying, like, yeah, I feel like this is really overwhelming, I feel really burdened with this. Getting at what they're actually feeling about it rather than the content of it themselves, like itself. I one time one time had two people on my unit that thought they were both Jesus, and that was a real problem. So um that didn't go over. Unfortunately, there weren't any incidents over that, but I did think it was kind of funny. I was like, wait, you're Jesus and you are also Jesus. How does that work out? So it's kind of funny, and you know, funny actually. It's more sad than funny when that
Mhm.
happens. Delusions are they can be very tragic. They usually start with a kernel of truth. And so maybe, in the case of like a religious grandiosity where somebody believes they're a religious figure, it might be that they feel very small or powerless in their own lives, and that this delusion has manifested as a way to make them feel more in control and bigger essentially than they really are. And so it can be like an overcompensation for a lot of things. um, Sometimes people will believe that they are multimillionaires with a beach house in Malibu or whatever. and um, and that's often, it's often the people who are unhoused who have those sort of delusions. And so again, it's their I don't want to say imagining, but their delusions manifest as something that compensates for what they don't have. They don't have a home, they don't have money, or they don't have a lot of money. And so if their mind says, well, maybe you do have all of this money in a huge reserve, or when you get out, you'll be able to go find this safe with thousands and thousands of dollars in it, or whatever. um, our minds are incredibly protective of ourselves, and it's a wonderful thing. So if we experience, for instance, a traumatic event, our brain is going to do what it can to protect itself from that traumatic event, which sometimes means suppressing the memories, which sometimes means altering the memories. And same thing with these folks, you know, when they're already struggling with mental illness, maybe substance abuse, and there's some huge deficit in their lives, our minds will try to counteract that and protect ourselves and try to say, hey, this is actually this way. So it's interesting the way that a lot of these symptoms manifest from very real issues. Um, yeah.
Right. Like even when it comes to um like the hallucinations and the delusions and the thoughts, like there's like a hidden trauma,
Mm-hmm,
right? Like particularly even if it's something religious, right?
mm-hmm,
I don't know, maybe some kind of trauma happened in the church, right?
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
There's always like a hidden, trauma somewhere, and maybe you have the abusive parent, right, who's a
Mm-hmm.
priest and who's always like, you're going to hell, you're going to hell,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so you have
Yeah.
these delusions about the world burning and the world going to hell. Like there's always
Mm-hmm.
some sort of like connection to a hidden trauma, which is interesting.
Yes,
So this is
or
go ahead, sorry.
we all have to like make meaning of the world in some way, and so sometimes it's easy to just manifest in, you know, in religious meaning that's outside of the norm. So of course we know there are normative religious beliefs, and then there are things that are a little out there, and so that can sometimes it's the way that they make meaning of the world and understand the world.
Yeah, yeah. There's so much we could cover. We may have to do a part two on this. But but let's get into and also keeping an eye on the time.
Sure.
Let's just jump into the myths about people with schizophrenia. Are they violent?
Great question. That's a very, very common myth. And the answer that I always give is that folks with schizophrenia or any type of severe and persistent mental illness are far more likely to be victims of violence than perpetrators of violence. And there have been multiple studies on this. There's evidence to back that up. Folks with severe mental illness are incredibly vulnerable, and again I defer to, you know, folks that I've worked with who have been unhoused, chronically unhoused, who've struggled with poverty, who, you know, when somebody is unhoused they're naturally going to be more inclined to be victimized because they are out in the world, they don't have a place to close the door and lock it behind them, and so they are inherently more vulnerable. They also, because of the stigma of mental illness, and people have a fear of people with mental illness. And again, because of the way that it's often represented in the media, in pop culture. And we have this belief that people are going to be inherently dangerous, and that's just not true. Um, I always have to remind myself that my my understanding of schizophrenia is somewhat skewed because I am working with people who have schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, bipolar disorder, who have committed crimes. And I have to remind myself that I'm really seeing the minority. There are many people who live with these disorders out in the community, and like I mentioned earlier, they're able to have jobs, they're able to have families, they're able to function normally. Don't really like to use the word normally, but like most people in society. And then if somebody is found not guilty by reason of insanity, then they are really among the most minor of cases um, that are adjudicated. Most people who are arrested and convicted of something are going to take a plea deal. There's a very small percentage of folks that are actually going to go through the system and be adjudicated as not guilty by reason of insanity or guilty except for insanity. The nomenclature varies from state to state. And uh, so they're not like I said, they're not inherently going to be dangerous. That said, many of the folks that I do work with have the command auditory hallucinations that I was referring to earlier, where their voices may be telling them that they have to hurt somebody or they have to hurt themselves. And I've worked with people who said, well, Taylor Swift is making, wants me to go kill this person. And Taylor Swift, please don't tell anybody to kill anybody. It's not nice. But that's a genuine belief that people have. And so they might go attack somebody. More common than not is this sort of self-protective mode. And I have heard variations of this story many, many, many times where the person believes that somebody is going to kill them, and so they have to attack or kill them first to protect themselves. It's a very unfortunate and common tale where they'll see somebody across the train station and think, oh, that person is person X or Y who's coming to get me. I need to do something, and so they might pull out a knife and just be ready and waiting. And then this person who's normally going about their day walks in front of them and happens to look over at them, and that's their cue to go attack. So most of the time, folks who experience schizophrenia or another psychotic disorder are acting in self-defense, and they really, really believe that it is self-defense. And sometimes they act on behalf of somebody else, so they might believe that they are protecting somebody else, and so they might hurt somebody thinking that they're about to attack some other person that's unrelated to the entire instance. So it's a complex issue, and ultimately they are more at danger to themselves. So they're more at risk. I forget what the statistics are, but the suicide completion rate among folks with schizophrenia or other psychotic disorders is very high. Um, they also have a high percentage of suicide attempts. Some of them will attempt to die by suicide by cop. Um, and there are just many ways in which they are more at risk of harming themselves than they are of harming anyone else. So that's something that I, as a psychologist, have to manage, because I constantly am asking my patients if their voices are telling them, if they have voices, if they're telling them to hurt themselves, and or what their thought content is like. Are they thinking of hurting anybody else? Are they thinking of hurting themselves? Are they thinking of taking out their anger on the wall or a door or whatever? Because that's stuff that, as the treating psychologist, I need to know in order to best help them.
And and then another thing I'm thinking of as you're talking is like all when it comes to the hallucinations and the delusions, of course, this is one part of schizophrenia, but
Mhm.
um, it's usually like some sort of harm, whether it's being done to themselves or to other people. Like, are there happy delusions? Like, are there happy hallucinations? Like, oh, my angel's telling me, to have 3 jobs. I don't know, but like, can you adjust? Because it just seems like when it comes to like law enforcement, or it's usually some sort of violent acts,
Mhm.
and even with media portrayal, it's
Mhm.
they're killing people.
Mhm.
So it's are there happy delusions? Is there a happy? Is there someone with schizophrenia who's having like positive hallucinations, positive delusions?
Yes,
What's positive?
it's far more rare, but it does happen every once in a while. I have somebody. It's sort of my malingering test, my go-to. Like if their voices are saying like "You've got this, you can do anything," I'm like, that's pretty rare. Let's check in on that, which is unfortunate. I always tell my patients like I wish your voices were nicer and told you you're having a great hair day and you look fantastic, but they rarely do. But every once in a while, I have somebody who says, yeah, they're kind of like my little cheerleaders. And I'm like, that's cool. Don't know if I believe it, but that's cool. Um, and every once in a while, I mean, with delusions, it's far more common to have happier delusions or delusions with positive content. I mean, the one about being a millionaire and having a beach house in Malibu, that would be pretty great. Others believe that they are famous actors or that they write music for famous singers, and it's like, well, that would be a cool world to live in. There are, you know, some delusions are seem like really wonderful places to be in, but most are pretty negative. Um, at least as far as I've experienced. I'm trying to even think. Every once in a while, I come across a really good delusion. I'll say where I'm like, I want to live in that world. That is the peaceful world I want to live in. It's unfortunate it's not real, but it sounds pretty darn good, and so I just want to keep that person there. They're in a good mood. They're in a good space. Life is grand.
Absolutely, absolutely. All right, all right. I know we're coming
Yeah.
down on time. Um, can you? So maybe we'll end on this part. Can you talk about the treatment of schizophrenia? How do you treat it? So my experience is, um, well, my experience tends to be in terms of what I've seen is
Mm-hmm.
just basic medication, right? So whether it's taking um, well, the medication I tend to see is Haldol, which is like
Mm-hmm.
an injection every
Can be,
2 weeks,
yeah.
I think. Yeah, it's Haldol, and then there's another one that I don't remember.
Mm-hmm.
So, what are the treatments that are out there? I mean, obviously, medication is one.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you can talk more about that, or what are the treatments that don't have anything to do with medication, or
Mm-hmm.
in general, can you
Yeah.
what is the treatment for schizophrenia?
Yeah. So yes, you're right that medication is the primary line of defense. And you know, I'm not a prescriber, but I'm familiar with the medications that they take. There are the antipsychotic medications. There are the mood stabilizing agents, and so those in combination. Haldol is a what we call a first generation med. It's a little bit heavier duty. So um, for more severe cases. One of the more common medications that we use today is called Zyprexa, fantastic antipsychotic medication that has the unfortunate side effect of metabolic changes. So people can gain a significant amount of weight in a very short period of time. I've seen people gain about 90 pounds in about 6 or 7 months. So it can have serious medical implications. And so we try to offset that with good nutrition and exercise. As far as non-pharmacological interventions, we have uh, what I do right now is I do a lot of teaching on managing aggression and understanding their symptoms. If they understand what their symptoms are, if they understand how to manage their symptoms, that can be really helpful. I try to We have a specific group that's not happening right now. It was put on pause because of COVID, but it's a cognitive behavioral therapy for psychosis. And so it helps them kind of piece apart their own symptomology. It's for folks who are their symptoms are pretty well managed, so they're able to think more rationally. They're able to say, hey, I don't have evidence for this belief that I had. You know, I believed that the FBI was following me, but I never saw anybody, I never received anything. Chances are the FBI is not looking for somebody like me, or whatever the case may be. They're looking for evidence, and so in that group they're able to piece apart some of the more entrenched parts of their delusions and see what may be incorrect. And that's a really terrific group. I hope we're able to reopen it soon. A lot of what we do for treatment is managing their stress, just like we would for anybody else. Understanding their symptoms, understanding the what we call the early warning signs. You know, what are the things that lead up to them having bigger symptoms, right? Many, if not most, of my patients really have a difficult time understanding what feelings what emotions feel like in their body. So if I say, if you say you feel anxious, where do you feel that in your body? Is your heart racing? Is your blood kind of pumping? Do you feel tense? Do you have a headache? Are your eyebrows scrunched? They're Many of them are really unable, or it's difficult for them to identify how their symptoms manifest. And so a lot of what I do is really basic things like, this is what angry looks like, this is what angry sounds like, this is what sad looks like, this is what sad sounds like. And so for many of them, they just struggle to identify their emotions in general. And so doing some education, even as basic as it sounds, um, seems like something that, or is something that they need to learn in order to best address, like, oh, I'm doing this, therefore I must be feeling stressed, I must be feeling sad, whatever. And then they can manage their symptoms a little bit better.
Awesome, awesome, awesome.
I could talk all day about
I
this.
know, I know. And I'm like, I'm horrible with time. But I just want to get this last point in. So how do they tell, how do you help patients tell the difference between what's there and not and what's not there, right? Like I can see like a visual, I guess I'm talking about like hallucinations, but I'm
Mm-hmm.
thinking like a visual hallucination. If they see something, they might turn to someone and say, do you
Mm-hmm.
see the angel on my shoulder? And I might be
Mm-hmm.
like, no, I don't see it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in terms of um I mean, delusions are a little bit harder to kind of tell the difference
Yeah.
between, but in general, like, how do you help patients tell the difference between what's real and what's not real?
It's incredibly difficult. And I'm thinking, one case comes to my mind where I had a patient who believed that his peers were poisoning or putting chemicals into his clothing, into his bedding. And so he'd come up to me and say, do you see this rash? Like, I have this terrible rash right here. And, that was his proof that they were burning him with these chemicals. And I said, I'm sorry, I don't see a rash. Does it feel hot? Is it something you need to get checked out by, a nurse? And he said, well, they keep saying the same thing, that it's not there. I'm like, all I can tell you is that I don't see it. And, it sounds like you see it. It's really, really difficult in those situations, especially when it's a paranoid delusion combined with they're seeing something that's not there. All I can say is, from my perspective, because I take it as what they're experiencing is 100% real to them. It's as real as what I'm experiencing right now. If somebody were to say, no, you're not doing an interview for a podcast, I'd be like, yeah, I am. Can't you see that's what I'm doing right now? And if they try to convince me otherwise, I'd be like, don't you see my computer set up, right? And so it's the same mentality with these guys. It can be really difficult to treat that. And I think the big thing, like I mentioned earlier, is validating their feelings, validating their concerns, because the feelings are real even if the content is not. And so what I try to do is manage the stress, manage the anger, if it's anger that's popping up, or the sadness, whatever the feeling is what's real. So with this patient with the rash, he was very worried, and so we just do a lot of stress reduction. Let's find something to distract you. Let's do something that would be soothing for you right now, because it's not going to change the fact that he believes that somebody's trying to uh, burn him or poison him.
Yeah, yeah. All right. Well, there's so much more we could talk about, but we got to start to wind things
Yeah,
down.
sorry.
So, do you have any final words of wisdom that you would like to share with our
I
audience?
would. I actually wrote down this quote by Maya Angelou that I love. That's my sign off for my podcast, and I think it's really fitting for just working with mental illness in general. And it's, do the best you can until you know better, and then when you know better, do better. And I love that quote. Um, you know, we're all we might mess up a lot. We're gonna mess up along the way. Let's be real. And when we do finally know better, then we can change and we can do something different. And when we see things a different way, it's like, okay, well, maybe I can think about this differently from now on.
All right. If you so repeat it one more time. Say
Sure.
that quote again.
Do the best you can until you know better. And then when you know better, do better.
Beautiful. Beautiful quote. Beautiful beautiful way to end the segment. So Sarah, thank you so much for joining me today and for tackling this topic.
Mm-hmm.
And it looks like we may go a little bit over time, but that is all right. So we have to do oh wait, we have a public comment here. Love that quote. Hi, Carla. All right, great. Just wanted to put that out there. All right. All right, so let's go ahead and jump to the promo.
Yay.
All right, you can find Sarah Gallup in a lot of different ways, you guys. So she has a private Facebook group. You may have to reach out to her to get in the super secret group, but she has a private Facebook group for her podcast. It is called the Behind the Walls podcast. So I encourage you to reach out to Sarah if you want to kind of get into the inner workings of the podcast. I encourage you to sign up to join her group. So you'll have to reach her by other means. So you can reach her on Instagram. She has 2 Instagram accounts. So one of them is Leanie Lou Who.
Mm-hmm.
And the other one is Behind the Walls Pod. So if you're on Instagram, I encourage you to follow her on both of her accounts. That's Leanie Lou Who and Behind the Walls Pod. So follow her on both of her Instagram accounts and send her a DM. Be like, I want to get in that super secret private group on Facebook for your podcast.
Send you a link.
She will let you in. She is also on TikTok. The account is Dr. Sarah Hyleen.
Mm-hmm.
Did I say that right?
Sarah
Okay. Hyleen.
Hyleen.
Yes. Hyleen. All right. So Dr. Sarah Hyleen, that is her account name on TikTok. So follow her on TikTok as well. And of course, you could just send her an email. The email is behindthewallspodcast@gmail.com.
Mm-hmm.
So you can reach her in so many different ways. Follow her on Instagram with both accounts. Follow her on TikTok. Reach out to her to get in that super secret private group. You'll have to reach out to her, but make sure you get in that Facebook group as well. And of course, speaking of podcasts, Sarah has a podcast, which we talked about a few times today. So I encourage you to check out her podcast. It is called Behind the Walls of the World's Psychiatric Hospitals. You can find that podcast wherever there are podcasts. So whatever your favorite station is, whether it's Spotify or Apple or Good Pods or iHeartRadio, you can find it wherever there are podcasts. So check out her podcast. Sarah, is there anything else you want to talk about in terms of your podcast? Anything you want the audience to know?
Just a quick plug about the podcast. It's about old psychiatric asylums. And so I just finished up a 6-part series on Oregon State Hospital in Salem, Oregon. And I'm going to release a 1, maybe 2-part section on the Fairview Training Center, which was also in Salem, Oregon, which was an old asylum for folks with developmental disabilities and intellectual disabilities.
There you go. So if you're looking for some entertainment, you're looking to learn a little something, check out her podcast. Once again, it is called Behind the Walls of the World's Psychiatric Hospitals. You can find it wherever you get your podcasts. All right. Well, Sarah, thank you so much for coming back on the show.
Yeah,
and thank you for joining me again.
Yeah, glad to do so. Thank you.
Awesome. All right. Let me place you backstage. All right, you guys. It is closing time. All right, you guys. We have reached the conclusion of yet another episode. Thank you so much for joining me today on Hot Topics. Whether you are returning to the show, whether you're brand new, whether you're listening to this on the replay or watching this on the replay, I have to remember it's video and audio. So whether you're taking in the show again on the replay, whatever the medium is. Thank you again for joining me today. So I want to take this time to remind you that Hot Topics is a production of my company, A Step Ahead Tutoring Services. So my services, we offer one-on-one tutoring, test prep, college counseling, editing and proofreading. We also do a variety of virtual workshops as well. So if you are looking for a tutor, whether it's for your child or multiple children, or whether it's for yourself, we do in person sessions if you're in the New York City area. And we also do virtual sessions as well. So if you are looking for any kind of academic assistance, homework help, reach out to us. Our website is www.astepaheadtutoringservices.com. You could also send us an email, success@astepaheadtutoringservices.com. You could also call or text us. Our phone number is 347-762-2838. You can also reach out to us and follow us on our multiple social media platforms. We are on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. The handle is A Step Ahead Tutoring Services. We are also on Twitter. The handle is ASATS2013. And we are also on WhatsApp as well. It is just our business name, A Step Ahead Tutoring Services. So you could find us on multiple platforms. I also encourage you to follow us on our social media platforms as well. So there's so many different ways to reach out to us and stay in touch with us as well. I will share our website one more time. It is www.astepaheadtutoringservices.com. So check us out today. And I also want to encourage you, whether you are watching this on video or listening, well, let me just say, whether you're watching this on like Facebook or YouTube or Twitter, or you're listening on audio, whether you're listening to this on Spotify or iHeartRadio or Spreaker or Good Pods, however you are taking in this episode, I encourage you to let us know your feedback. I want to know what you thought about this episode today. So drop a comment, drop a star, drop a line, drop something. Let us know your feedback about this episode. So give us a rating, give us a comment, give us a like, share us with your friends. Well, share this episode with your friends. Whatever it is, do it. do it. So let us know your thoughts about this episode for today. Please drop a comment in the comment section below, or drop a rating, drop a star. Let us know your thoughts about this episode for today. The feedback will help us out a lot. All right, you guys. Thank you guys so much for joining me today. I look forward to you joining me at the next episode. So, you guys, thank you again. And now I am signing off. Bye, you guys.